Hey there folks, the number one Melt Banana fan from the Infinite Jukebox here with another album review, and today I want to talk about the new Melt Banana record, 3+5. One of the all-time great underground bands, period, bar none, is none other than straight out of Japan, Melt Banana. And when you take into account their wildly unique style, it is honestly not that hard to see why they've become such a cult status beloved band in the way that they have over the course of the past couple of decades. After all, few bands are truly original in the sense that there are approximately no other artists like them making similar music, but Melt Banana really does legitimately fall into that category alongside a select few. I mean, genuinely, I dare you to list me off just one other band artist who is an electronic influenced noise rock slash hardcore band that can outpace even the fastest major punk and metal bands on the planet right now, while also maintaining structural integrity and never fully going into the realm of grindcore, all the while having a vocalist that sounds like a schoolgirl snapping each of your bones all at once. There is no other band that sounds like Melt Banana on this planet, and that's why I'm so consistently inclined to list them as one of my favorite bands. Besides the fact that they rarely miss, even when they do, it is wildly creative, and, well, they really just haven't missed in the course of the past 20 or so years. It just so happens. In turn, it's kind of a shame that Melt Banana have been on such a long studio hiatus. I mean, they've been out and about touring and doing shows, tearing it up as they always have since day one, but it has been a solid 11 years since their last studio album, their 2013 magnum opus, Fetch, one of my all-time favorite albums. And as such, I kind of feel like I would have been fine with that being their last album. If Melt Banana decided that they wanted to be nothing but a touring act from now on, never to step foot into a proper recording studio ever again, Fetch would have been a damn good album to go out on. It is arguably their most popular record, their most consistent record, their most easily accessible record, though calling Melt Banana accessible is like calling something on the upper ends of the Scoville scale accessible for people who don't like heat. I just feel like it was a good album to go out on for any band, and it just so happens that it also was kind of their best in a lot of regards. But now, a solid 11 years, well over a decade later, here we are with their latest studio album, 3+5, and while it may not be one of my new favorite albums in the same way that Fetch has been consistently over time, 3+5 is a really great entry in the Melt Banana discography and consistently ranks among their best work, which is most of the music that they've been putting out for the past 20 or so years, if I'm being frank. They've, again, never really missed, and this is no exception. Something that I find interesting about 3+5 is that, honestly, it feels like the loosest that Melt Banana have been in a long while. I mean, of course, this has always been a project with an intense style, and especially in their early years, they were about as DIY as any band could possibly be. But that being said, as time went on and records like 2003's Cellscape, an absolute classic, came out, they managed to balance out their sort of garagey sensibilities with something significantly more refined, which honestly worked very well, extremely in their favor, more so than most other bands that go in a more clean direction could ever hope to achieve. But ultimately, it worked out extremely well, and it kind of created the sound that Melt Banana are mostly known for at this point. Their most beloved albums coming out in the period that has begun since the early to mid 2000s. It caused them to create some of their most acclaimed works, and as a whole, they just became more dialed in structurally, yet never faltering in regards to the rawness of their material. And now here on 3+5, a lot of those similar comments could be made in terms of kind of having things be a little more clean, still focusing heavily on those cleaner electronic influences and incorporating those into the noise rock, noise punk kind of direction that Melt Banana have always been known for. But at the same time, there's just something special feeling about this album in regards to its tone that I think sets it apart from most other stuff they've done in recent memory. Recent memory, of course, being about 2003 to 2013, so you know, not really that recent. I was 7 when their last studio album came out, so, you know, do with that information what you will. At the end of the day, this is Melt Banana coming across as extremely free and almost kind of airy in terms of tone, which is something that was sort of lost on them for a very long time. Not to a negative effect or anything like that, but certainly to the point that this record does stand out distinctly, at least at times, from some of their previous efforts towards the end of what was originally seen as the final moments of their catalog from the early to sort of mid-2010s, again, when Fetch came out in 2013. But at the same time, they don't lose the chaos that defines them, but it's nice to see a comeback from them feel so natural and earnest while still maintaining staples of their sound, such as the heavy electronic influences and the piercing vocals, qualities that have defined this band for decades and have made them what they are as this entirely esoteric beast of a musical project. It's really pleasant to see them return with all of those amazing tendencies sonically, stylistically, aesthetically, however you would like to put it personally, while nonetheless coming across as more open and free to a more natural form of expression than ever before. And the electronic influences are still here in bulk as well, which, if you're anything like me, is one of your favorite parts about Melt Banana as a band, and that's also extremely nice to see. And even with all of that having been said, I think there's a lot to really admire about this album from a structural standpoint as well. Another quality that you could easily bring up talking about just about any Melt Banana album for the most part, whether you prefer their more noise-based influenced kind of records or their later, more traditionally structured kind of albums. I mean, for example, the ascension throughout the album opener Code makes for a sort of makeshift chorus almost that's worthy of appreciation, and similar things could be said about tracks like Stopgap, which is just further reason to cite Melt Banana as a band that deserves more credit for creating something utterly phenomenal from a structural standpoint. Obviously, I could sit here all day and praise them for being a sonically impressive band up and down, consistently great production across their discography, never once at any point in their entire body of work losing the fire that has made them such a punchy, lively, exciting band throughout the entirety of their career. I could go on all day about how exhilarating every single one of their albums is, even their weaker releases, but at the same time, I also feel like that's something that gets brought up anytime that anybody ever talks about Melt Banana, because it's the obvious thing to talk about, but I really think there is something to say about how excellent they are from a songwriting and song composing standpoint. There are some truly phenomenal progressions throughout this record that really do kind of continue to prove to me personally, at least, that this is a project that has always never really gotten the credit that they've deserved for creating some extremely, again, well-written, well-composed, well-thought-out, very catchy, memorable songs that nonetheless never once lose any particular reason to be this extremely hyper, over-the-top, energetic, outright electric kind of sound. And if I'm being completely honest, I think that there's some pretty fresh qualities here that allow Melt Banana to shine in certain ways that arguably haven't been seen from them before. I know that basically everything I've talked about in this review up to this point has been reflecting on qualities of 3+5 that are very much represented in other Melt Banana records. Their popular records, their less discussed records, no matter what you really go for in their discography, you can find pretty much any record that kind of represents what I've talked about here so far. That outstanding production, those piercing, shrill vocals, the very heavily electronic influenced hardcore, etc., etc. But at the same time, I also think that there's some interesting things that really do allow this record to completely distance itself from the rest of the Melt Banana discography, not to the point of being completely different stylistically, but enough that if I had not heard this record prior to it, actually being reviewed here on the channel, I would still probably be able to point out the fact that this is from a Melt Banana album that I've never heard, because there are differences here that make it stand out. For example, I think that this is maybe their most atmospheric project to date, with their focus being placed on the realm of explosive tempos and impassioned performances, of course, but songs like Scar and the album closing track Seeds manage to convey a sort of over-the-top, chaotic, self-destructive dreaminess about them that feels like relatively uncharted territory for for them. Of course, like I said before, Melt Banana have always been a band with fantastic production, but it really does feel like they've taken these things into a certain dreamy wall of noise kind of direction in some of the more swelling, impactful peak moments on those particular tracks that stand out as something new for them, which is kind of nice to see. A direction that doesn't completely divert itself away from what makes Melt Banana great, but nonetheless manages to achieve something new in the context of their overarching body of work that allows 3+5 to be a unique release and one worth waiting 11 years for. And of course, this is still done through the filter of their blistering electronic hardcore fusion, but nonetheless, it is nice to see that 3+5 can capably handle the more traditional Melt Banana sound, if you can even call what they do quote-unquote traditional, alongside some fresh ideas and concepts that really do liven this album up and turn it from a great Melt Banana comeback album to just a great album, period. And I think it's just a really lovely thing to see them still continuing to evolve stylistically 11 years after their last full-length studio album. So yeah, as a whole, Melt Banana, they haven't really been around for a while, at least not in full-length form in the studio. Again, over a decade. I can see why maybe some people would approach this record and not totally appreciate it because it's been such a long wait, but you know what? I can't complain. And you know what? I can completely understand the argument that this is a bit disappointing as far as comeback albums go for a band as beloved as Melt Banana is. After all, this album is just barely 24 minutes, not even cracking the half-hour mark by a solid 5 or so minutes, round about, almost 6. So I can definitely see why someone, especially a massive, die-hard, lifelong Melt Banana fan, would go into this album expecting some sort of grand comeback, and instead they just get a record that feels like Melt Banana have actually been putting out full-length LPs this entire time, and have no reason to try and satiate a fan base that has been missing full-length records from them for over a decade at this point. I can completely understand that perspective and being disappointed in this record in that regard. Hell, I'll even admit that when this album was first announced and I first saw the brevity of the track list, I was pretty disappointed as well. But from the perspective of it being not only a comeback album for such a consistently phenomenal band after a lengthy studio hiatus, but also just a regular Melt Banana album in general, it picks up where they left off extremely well. And while I do think it is up in the air for debate about whether or not you think that this was worth 11 years of waiting or not, I do think that across the board, most Melt Banana fans, particularly fans of their last couple of studio albums, will be able to appreciate just how extremely well put together, how extremely energetic, how extremely Melt Banana this album is. I truly cannot put it in any other way than this is about as Melt Banana as it gets. I'm going to give this record 4 stars out of 5. And with that being said, that is the end of this album review. Thanks for watching The Infinite Jukebox, and I'll see you in the next one.